So we've been looking at Parshat HaShavua, the weekly Torah portion. As everybody knows, every Shabbat, take out the Torah and we read the next weekly portion. But there's a couple of times in the year when that doesn't happen, and this week is one of them. So tomorrow night we begin Shavuot, the Festival of Weeks, commemorating when the Torah was given, and the first fruit harvest in Israel. And it's celebrated for 2 days. So it's Thursday night and Friday, and then Friday night and Saturday. So now on Saturday, we've got a problem. Ordinarily, we would be reading the next weekly portion from the book of Numbers, and it is not so. However, it's also Yontif, and on Yontif there's a special Torah reading that relates to the holiday. So what are we supposed to do? Some people might say, why don't we read both? Read the weekly portion and then read additionally read the portion for that holiday. I think there was a sense by the rabbis that would be too much. There's a concept in rabbinic Judaism called tircha de tzibura, which means burdening, overburdening the community and the congregation. And there's certain things we're not supposed to do because people are just sitting there, you're wasting their time. A classic example would be on a day when we read from two Torah scrolls, like a Yontif, you might think, well, we can just take out one, and after we read the first portion, we'll roll the Torah to the second portion. But, unlike a book where you can flip it and within 3 seconds you can go from Genesis to Deuteronomy, can't do that with a Torah scroll. So the congregation would be just sitting there as we're rolling and rolling and rolling. Could be 5 minutes, could be 10 minutes with nothing going on. So therefore, the principle is we don't overburden the community. Better to take out 2 Torahs from the ark. So you got the first one, you got the second one, and you're covered. So I have a sense that's perhaps why they said this Saturday, we're not going to read Naso and the portion for Shavuot. We got to pick one or the other. And if you were to read them both, you'd really be taking away from either the Sabbath portion or from the Yontif portion. So therefore, the principle becomes we read on Saturday, this Saturday, we read the portion for Shavuot, and we put off till the following week the portion, the regular weekly portion of Naso, when there's nothing special except Shabbat a week from this coming Saturday. So we, for Shavuot, we will be reading on each day a special reading. On the first day of Shavuot, we read, since Shavuot, by the way, is the day of the giving of the Torah. So we read that story from the book of Exodus when God gave the Torah to the Israelites. And the heart of that portion is chapter 20 of Exodus, which is the 10 Commandments. On the second day of Shavuot, we read from the book of Deuteronomy, in which we read a calendar of the festivals of the year. And of course, we'll have Passover and then Shavuot and then the festival of Sukkot. So that will be the reading. And of course, I think you know that on Yontif, there's a second Torah that's always taken out. And that second Torah speaks about, and it's from the book of Numbers, and it always speaks about the korbanot, the offerings that were brought on that particular festival back in the days when there was a Mishkan, a tabernacle, and later when there was a Beit HaMikdash, a temple in Jerusalem. Okay, so this this Friday and Saturday, we're reading about Shavuot, and on Friday, we will be reading the story of Ma'amad Har Sinai, the stand of the Jewish people at Mount Sinai and the revelation of God to the people of the Torah. So let me just give you a little bit of the background and then share with you my thoughts. On the third new moon, after the Israelites had gone forth from the land of Egypt, they leave Egypt on what's Passover and third new moon. So ultimately, it's going to be 50 days later, more or less. On that day, they entered the wilderness of Sinai. Having journeyed from Rephidim, they entered the wilderness of Sinai and camped in the wilderness. Israel encamped there in front of the mountain. And Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, and then we read of the preparations that will need to be done and ultimately of the giving of the Torah. So we're going to read, if we skip to verse 16 in Exodus chapter 19, it will go like this. On the third day, as morning dawned, there was thunder and lightning and a dense cloud upon the mountain and a very loud blast of the horn. And all the people who were in the camp trembled. Moses led the people out of the camp toward God, and they took their places at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was all in smoke, for the Lord had come down upon it in fire. The smoke rose like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled violently. The blare of the horn, the shofar, grew louder and louder. Moses spoke, and God answered him in thunder. The Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. And then not too long after this, when Moses comes down, of course, he's going to see the golden calf, he's going to break the tablets, and God wants to be rid of the Israelites. Moses argues him out of it. And then Moses says the following at that later point to God. See, you say to me, lead this people forward, and you have not made known to me whom you will send with me. Further, you have said, I have singled you out by name, and you have indeed gained my favor. Now, if, Moses says, if I have truly gained your favor, pray let me know your ways, that I may know and continue in your favor. So Moses says, show me you, let me see you. Tell me about you. You're invisible. I need to know who I'm dealing with so that I can represent you better to the Israelites. And then ultimately God says, well, I don't know. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I will do this thing that you have asked, for you have truly gained my favor. I have singled you out by name. He says, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you the name God and the grace that I grant and the compassion that I show. But, God said, you cannot see my face, for man may not see me and live. See, there is a place near me. Station yourself on the rock, and as my presence passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock and shield you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take my hand away and you will see my back. This is God talking. You will see my back, but my face must not be seen. Okay, with that as the background, here's what I've been thinking. Often we take the Bible, the Torah, literally and assume that we're dealing with journalism, that it's simply recording what happened. I often come to the Torah with the notion of whatever happened then could happen today. And what happens today is the kind of things that they went through then. So very often, just me, I'm looking for ways to grasp, to understand the Torah from a more natural point of view, not the supernatural story. Let's be honest. Believers read the supernatural stuff and believers say, okay, if it's written, it's got to be true. And yes, those things don't happen anymore, but they happened then. And I believe the Bible. I believe the Word of God. There are other people, like in Porgy and Bess, who would say, it ain't necessarily so. The things that you're liable to read in the Bible, they ain't necessarily so. So I'm always looking to try to understand Moses as if he lived today and he was sent on this great mission. And what did he really experience? What did he really think? What did he really do? And sometimes I try to leave the supernatural God, the mythic God, out of that story because those things don't seem to happen in our day. So I'm working under the assumption maybe they didn't happen in Moses's day either. So the real question becomes, what did happen, right? And we're building up to the giving of the Torah. How did that happen? Believers, traditionalists, see Moses as mainly a scribe, and he came to take dictation. And God said, okay, take out your pen and start writing down. And God literally and simply dictates, and Moses writes it down. And then he brings the tablets with the commandments down, and he has memorized everything else, which ultimately he will commit to some other kind of writing, maybe on papyrus, maybe on parchment, who can say. So again, my interest, what really fascinates me is the question, if Moses was a modern guy and he was there on the mountain, why was he there? What did he hear? What was God like? And ultimately, where did the commandments, where did the Torah come from? Was Moses simply a stenographer, or was Moses a great poet and writer and lawgiver, right? That becomes my interest and my concern. So here's an attempt to try to figure that out. Moses on the mountain. God, everyone believes, is here on the mountain, but I have not found him yet. What I have found is quiet. I haven't known quiet like this in the longest time. First, there was the barking of orders by the Egyptian taskmasters and the sound of the crack of whips. There was the noise of stone being chiseled and straw being chopped and bricks being piled high. And the sighs and the screams of the slaves alongside their prayers to their God. And later, there was the sighing and the screaming of the Egyptians as their river turned to blood, as their livestock and crops were destroyed, and finally, as their children were struck down in the middle of the night. And the bleating of sheep being slaughtered, and bread being baked, and slaves packing up their few possessions. And then the sounds of the sea, followed swiftly by the complaining and criticizing and second guessing as the people turned to me and then against me. It's been 7 weeks, and here we are at the mountain, the very same one where a year ago I first saw a bush on fire and thought I heard the voice of God telling where to go and what to do. Sometimes we seem to forget that the burning bush, chapter 3 in the book of Exodus, when God speaks to Moses out of the bush and says, go back to Egypt, and this is what your mission is, and then you will come back here. So apparently Sinai, Mount Sinai, also known as Mount Horeb, was where Moses started, and then ultimately where the culmination of the mission happened. I told the people that I would climb the mountain and talk to God. The truth is that I have come just as much up here to get away from them as to find him. Can you imagine Moses? And you remember in chapter 18 of Exodus, when Yitro, Moses' father-in-law, comes back with Moses' wife and 2 children, and he meets them, and he sees that Moses is overwhelmed. People are standing by Moses' tent all hours of the day. They need his advice, they need his guidance, they need his judgment, right? And it's just too much. Here is a man who, for probably a year, has been involved in this battle with Pharaoh, and with now from the Exodus, and now with the what took place at the sea. It's been nonstop, 24/7 work and complaints and all sorts of difficulties. So maybe when Moses tells the people, I need to go up to the mountain, he tells them to get a message from God. God is always up on the mountain, right? But maybe it was more Moses saying, I need to get away from them. And the excuse is, I'm going to talk to God. And it's only when he's on this mountain for the first time in a year by himself that Moses actually has some peace and quiet and time when he can begin to think, what's going to happen next? What do we do? If I do find God, then I need him to tell me what lies ahead. Remember, a year before when he was at the burning bush, he did have a sense that God had sent him on this mission. Was it the voice of God from the burning bush? Or was it the voice of God from his conscience and his heart inside of him, telling him, you got to go back to your people. You got to save your parents and your brother and sister and all your people. Where am I going to find food and water, right? The way out of Egypt was through the desert, and there's no food and water. What am I going to do? How am I going to get by? They took initially enough provisions to last them a little bit of time in the desert and hopes that we'll make it to the next oasis. Hopefully there'll be a well or a spring. Hopefully there'll be palm trees and dates. But what are we going to do? How will we deal with the violent tribes that await us along the way? They've already dealt with the Amalekites, and there's half a dozen other tribes waiting for them along the way. How to survive the sun during the day and the cold at night. Perhaps one answer to that would be building a sukkah, okay? And the snakes and the scorpions. Later on in the book of Numbers, we're going to find that indeed the people are going to be attacked by snakes. And Moses has to deal with that and try to heal people of all of these snake bites. And what happens when we get to the land of Israel, our father? And what am I going to do to prevent these people from turning on one another? If I was alone, I probably could make it across the desert in 2 or 3 weeks. But with all these people, including the old and the young, it could take us as long as a few months. How ironic that Moses thinks at this point that, well, it might take 2-3 months for us to get from Egypt to the land of Canaan. Little did he know it would take them 40 years. And if I don't find God, which so far I haven't, then what? All I can do is take a few days to think back on the past, who we are, and where we came from. I will write down what I know and what has been passed on to me by my parents. And I will take some time to dream about the future. So if the 5 books of Moses includes the book of Genesis, with all the stories that begin with creation and go through Adam and Eve, and then Noah, and then Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, is that what God simply dictated to Moses? Or Moses here seems to be hinting, I'm going to stop and I'm going to remember all the stories my mother told me as she was nursing me and bringing me up during those years. And I will ultimately write them down, that history that my parents taught me, so that all these people that I brought out, they will have a record of our history. And I will take some time to dream about the future, what kind of nation we want to be. Perhaps most urgently, these people need some order and meaning in their lives. Till now, they have only known slavery and cruelty. So Moses was well aware that the way that the Egyptians controlled the people was with whips and with cruelty, and forcing them to work so hard that they didn't have any strength to rise up against the Egyptians. I will try to build on the lessons of the past so that we can create a much brighter future. So I'm imagining that here's Moses with all these people waiting for him down there, giving himself kind of sabbatical, you'll excuse the expression, from the man who creates the Sabbath. And ultimately, Moses says, if I'm going to give these people order and structure in their lives, what is it going to be? What will be it? What do I want them to do? What do I want them to know? And that becomes the essence of what Torah is. What do I want them to know about their past? What do I want them to be in their future? How do I want them to behave? And then all of a sudden, as Moses is up there on the mountain, contemplating, meditating, thinking, planning, scheming, he says, there, from the south, a flash of lightning, and there, the crash of thunder. Dark clouds are heading this way. Strange to see such a storm here in the desert. I hope the people will not panic. I will take shelter in the cleft of this rock. Right? So again, a traditionalist would say that this was Moses with his sound effects and his lighting, creating this very dramatic moment. I would say you think about Wizard of Oz when Dorothy and the other 3 come in to meet the great Wizard of Oz at that moment. And of course, you've got the sound effects and this circle that looks like the sun with a face who's screaming at them, and it sounds like thunder and lightning, and they are petrified. So is that really what's taking place? Is this meeting the Wizard of Oz, who is God. And, only Moses is the one who was allowed to stand before the great and mighty wizard. Okay? Or was there some kind of natural event that took place that you might not expect, a thunderstorm in the desert? And maybe that gave the people a sense of incredible drama and also incredible fear. Perhaps some people would read the account and they would say, maybe Sinai was a kind of volcano that all of a sudden was becoming active. And maybe that's what the smoke going up, and maybe that's what the fire and the lightning in the sky was all about. Or was it simply God, as the Wizard of Oz, telling the people, pay attention, I am the Lord your God, and this moment is one which will live forever. So I'm almost imagining that in that dramatic moment, people petrified at the foot of the mountain, Moses hiding from the lightning and the rain and the storm in the cleft of the rock, thinking about, what am I going to create? And maybe it's during this sabbatical that Moses comes up with rules, the Ten Commandments, the calendar of the year, the things that people need to do. Remember, people had been standing and complaining before Moses all of this time. He hit me, he stole that, she slept with him. What's going to happen here? And Moses, in trying to deal, instead of one-on-one every single day, hour after hour, takes all of the things that he's been dealing with and he tries to codify them, to put them down in a way that he simply, instead of having to deal as a judge with every case, can simply say, here's the rule book. Here's what you people need to do. And people say, who are you? And he could say, you know what? It was God on Mount Sinai who gave these laws. Not me, God gave it. Maybe Moses believed that. Maybe he just used that as an excuse to get people to ultimately obey. I don't know. It's an interesting question. So that's the Torah reading, actually for Friday, that we'll be reading when we celebrate the festival of Shavuot. So now I want to look at the Haftorah. And for Shavuos, we're going to have a Haftorah on Friday and another Haftorah on Saturday. The Haftorah for Friday is Ezekiel chapter 1, and it's one of the most puzzling, mysterious, fascinating, interesting prophetic pieces that we're going to come across. A little bit of the background. 586 BCE, the Babylonians come down from what is today Iraq, and they ultimately conquer Judah, which is where the tribe of Judah lived in the south, around Jerusalem, that area, and killed hundreds of thousands, destroyed the temple, took the survivors off into exile to Babylonia. So at that point, the Israelites who survived basically said, our lives are over, our history is over, our story is over. Nobody comes back from this kind of terrible catastrophe. And it was precisely to that moment that Ezekiel comes to the people and he brings them a message of hope in the future. And ultimately, all of what Ezekiel has to teach us is God still loves us. God has not forgotten us. God will bring us back. God will help us rebuild the temple. And once again, we will be a great nation, a free nation living in our land. That's the message of Ezekiel. And the way that his prophecy starts out is very mysterious. So let me read a little bit of it and then try to make some sense of it. So we're told in the 30th year, on the 5th day of the 4th month, when I was in the community of exiles by the Chebar Canal, the heavens opened and I saw visions of God. Here's a speaker speaking to people who were in Babylonia. He says, the heavens opened up and I saw a vision of God. Well, one of two things is going to happen. Either the people are going to laugh at him as a nut, crackpot, or the people are going to say, oh my God, before us is a man to whom God has revealed his will. On the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim, the word of the Lord came to the priest, the Kohen, Yechezkel ben Buzi, by the Chebar Canal in the land of the Chaldeans, Babylonians, and the hand of the Lord came upon him there. God didn't just speak to him. It's almost as if God grabbed him, right, by the collar, by the shirt, and picked him, chose him, spoke to him. I looked, and lo, a stormy wind came sweeping out of the north. You can almost see how Hollywood would have dealt with this. You know, the bramble rolling down and the sky turning gray and then dark and a wind, and you hear the sound effects. By the way, similar sound effects, similar lighting effects to exactly what we just read from the Torah. And that's one of the reasons that this Haftorah was chosen for the first day of Shavuot, because it mirrors what took place in the days of Moses. Time frame, Moses 1250 BCE, Ezekiel 580 BCE. Okay, so we see the number of years that have transpired. A huge cloud and flashing fire surrounded by a radiance, and in the center of it, in the center of the fire, a gleam as of amber. In the center of it were also the figures of 4 creatures, and this was their appearance. Again, this is a screenplay for a Hollywood movie. After this introduction, the sky turning black and the wind and everything moving and the noise, and almost like there is a brilliant light of fire. And then inside, coming out of the fire, we see this creature, figures of 4 creatures. They had the figures of human beings. Okay, so here's what I want you to picture of this monster, as it were. Each had 4 faces. So imagine 4 people standing, one guy this way, the next guy this way, one guy this way, one guy this way, right? So imagine 4 human beings standing shoulder to shoulder, but each one looking outward. But here's the crazy thing. Each of those 4 figures had 4 faces. So there was a face here, and a face here, and a face here, and a face there. Most popular thing at summer camp is, the ghost story around the campfire. And everybody wants to hear, everybody is petrified of being scared. And maybe that monster is really right behind us. And what Ezekiel does in his very first time out is he tells a ghost story. and people eat this stuff up. Of course, his ghost story is not going to end with boo and everybody screaming and yelling. This ghost story is going to end in a very happy way, as you'll see. 4 faces, each of them had 4 wings. The legs of each were fused into a single rigid leg. So imagine these 4 people, their 2 legs, you didn't really see 2 legs. The 2 legs were so close, it was almost as if one. But this one's leg was next to that one's leg and that next to that one. So the 8 legs were really like one giant tree stump in the middle. And the feet of each were like a single calf's hoof, and their sparkle was like the luster of burnished bronze. They had human hands below their wings. The 4 of them had their faces and their wings on their 4 sides. Each one's wings touched those of the others. They did not turn when they moved. Each could move in the direction of any of its faces. Each of them had a human face at the front. Each of the 4 had the face of a lion on the right. Each of the 4 had the face of an ox on the left. And each of the 4 had the face of an eagle at the back. Such were their faces. As for their wings, they were separated above. Each had 2 touching those of the others, while the other 2 covered its body. And each could move in the direction of any of its faces. They went wherever the Spirit impelled them to go, without turning when they moved. So it could move this way, could move that way, and everyone had a face that guided him that way. By the way, there are those that say that the animals represented perhaps kingdoms. You know, you had the kingdom of Egypt, you had the kingdom of Babylonia, perhaps another great nation was represented by these animals. And then we read, such then was the appearance of the creatures. With them was something that looked like burning coals of fire. This fire, suggestive of torches, kept moving about the creatures. The fire had a radiance, and lightning issued from the fire. Dashing to and fro among the creatures was something that looked like flares. As I gazed on the creatures, I saw one wheel on the ground next to each of the 4-faced creatures. So where the legs came down, there was a wheel. So each of the creatures had a wheel where its feet would have been. They gleamed like beryl. All 4 had the same form. The appearance and structure of each was as of 2 wheels cutting through each other. So imagine, you've got a wheel and then a wheel and then another wheel and another wheel, a wheel within a wheel. So ultimately, you've got at the bottom one globe, one wheel that could take the creatures in any direction. If it was one fixed wheel, it could only go forward and backward. But because the wheel within a wheel, it could go northeast, southwest, and then every other direction as well. And they could move in the direction of any of its 4 quarters. They did not veer when they moved. Their rims were tall and frightening, for the rims of all 4 were covered all over with eyes. Pretty scary stuff here. And when the creatures moved forward, the wheels moved at their sides. And when the creatures were born above the earth, the wheels were born too. Whenever the Spirit impelled them to go, they went. Whenever the Spirit impelled them, and the wheels were borne alongside them, for the spirit of the creatures was in the wheels. Of course, there's a famous Negro spiritual, Ezekiel saw the wheel way up in the middle of the air, and speaks about the wheel within the wheel in this great creature. So Ezekiel paints this picture. Why is he telling this ghost story to the people. And what's the point of the wheels and the fact that this being could move? Later on, it's going to tell us above the expanse over their head was the semblance of a throne, in appearance like sapphire. And on top, upon the semblance of a throne, there was the semblance of a human form. And of course, the vision here is this monster which carries a floor, and on top of the floor is a throne, and sitting on the throne, high above everyone, is what looks to be a human form, but this is ultimately God. What is Ezekiel's story and what is the message? You got to know that in the ancient world, people believed that gods were rooted to geography, right? That one of the great inventions in the world is the notion, the Jewish notion of monotheism, that there is one God who is God over all, over everyone. God is in every place. Unlike every other people who believed our God only controls Egypt, our God only controls Canaan, our God only controls Bavel. And that's why people in idolatry, in the notion of worshiping many gods, they could say our God is whoever is Ra or Marduk or Baal, but we accept that there's another God in some other place. The Jewish people came along with the revolutionary idea: there's only one God and he's God of everyone and he's everywhere. And maybe that's why ultimately the rabbis use the word makom, which means place, to refer to God. God is hamakom. God is to be found everywhere, not just with us, but all over the world, in heaven and on earth. So what Ezekiel's message to the people with this monster who was carrying the throne of God. And Ezekiel said, I saw this in Babylonia. And of course, the God is our God. And the revolutionary idea is that we might have thought that our God, Adonai, is only found in Jerusalem or in the land of Israel. But my vision is a reminder to tell people, no, our God is mobile. That's why he's got the wheels, right? God is with us. God goes with us into exile. God will bring us back and go with us back to our homeland. That's the main lesson of this incredible ghost story, this dramatic story that Ezekiel opens up with, right? One of the great opening chapters in all of world literature. You can't help but just sit there, eyes open, mouth open. Oh my God, what is he telling us? What does it mean? Imagine what it really looked like. Monsters welded together, and this wheel and fire and lightning and all these incredible things. So what I wanted to do was to try to take this story, and ultimately the question is, why did Ezekiel tell the people this? And of course the message is because they thought that God forgot about them, or God wasn't strong enough to take care of them. And the message of Ezekiel is ultimately, no, God is with us. He came with us. He will go back with us. We're okay. We're going to be all right. And I was trying to think of a contemporary, something at least that we know about, that, how does somebody come up with this crazy story in order to make his point and to convince somebody of something that they otherwise don't believe in. And so where does a Jew go? You go to Fiddler on the Roof. So here's the scene, the very famous scene of Tevye awaking from his nightmare from Sarah. And I'm imagining that this time it's not Tevye trying to convince his wife, but it's Ezekiel trying to convince his wife. And ultimately, not to give her the message, but to let her figure out the message on her own. So this is the way I imagined the scene. Straight out of Fiddler on the Roof. Ezekiel in his sleep. Help! 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 Ezekiel's wife in bed says, what is it? What? Ezekiel says, help! Help! And his wife says, Ezekiel, wake up. Why are you howling like that? Where is it? Where is it? The wife says, where's what? What are you talking about? Ezekiel says, it was a monster. It was standing here a minute ago. His wife says, what's the matter with you? You must have been dreaming. Tell me what you dreamt, and I'll tell you what it meant. Ezekiel says, all right, but don't be frightened. It was by the river Kevar. Suddenly the heavens opened up. There was a figure of 4 creatures. Each had 4 faces. There was a human face in front, and there was the face of a lion on the right, and the face of an ox on the left, and the face of an eagle at the back. And the legs were fused together into a single leg. And at the bottom of the legs, there were 4 wheels, a wheel within a wheel. And the creature could move in any direction. And above the creature was a throne. And on that throne sat the presence of God. The wife hears this, and she knows, of course, what all of this means. God is sending us a message. The human face, that's us. Israel in exile, feeling so poor. But we are told that we are like the majestic lion who can roar. And we have the strength of an ox who can gore. And we have the spirit of an eagle who can soar. The wheels are a hint that we are not stuck here in Bavel for long. Soon we shall roll right out of here. And through this terrible time, God is always above us, watching over us, taking care of our people. If God took the trouble to come all the way from the other world, all we can say is that it is for the best and possibly couldn't be any better. Amen. And Ezekiel, smiling to himself, says, Amen. So he's tested out his message on his wife. His wife gets it. She understands the symbolism. And ultimately, he knows, I'm going to be able to use that same story. My people will figure it out just like my wife did. You know, it's one thing when you tell somebody what it means. It's another thing when you simply paint the picture. You tell a story and they figure it all out on their own. A much stronger way to convey the message. So that's the Haftorah for this Friday. And previously, the 10 Commandments, that's the Haftorah for this Friday as well.